Hi guys, I am here with a Bible study. I hope you guys are having a good day. Good night, I should say. So tonight's Bible study is going to be in the book of John, John chapter 11. And John chapter 11 verse 40 says, "Then Jesus said, 'Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?'" Now who do you think he said that to? He said that to Martha, who was one of his followers. Martha and her sister Mary and Lazarus, they were all siblings, and Jesus was really close with all three of them. And Lazarus had died, and Jesus is going to raise him from the dead. That's what we're going to read today. So the death of Lazarus. Now, how long was Lazarus dead before Jesus raised him from the dead? Do you remember? 4 days. That's right, sure. And then Jesus comforts the sisters, which is Martha and Mary. And that's Mary, yes, that used that expensive perfume that the disciples talked down on her about, because it was like a year's wages, and she used it on Jesus's body and dried his feet with her hair, washed his feet with her tears and dried it with her hair. She's the one that used that perfume on Jesus, and Jesus told them to leave her alone, that she was getting him ready for burial, and she had done a beautiful thing for him, and wherever the gospel was preached, that would be preached in memory of her. And so it is to this very day as to why we know it. Okay, and then Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. The plot to kill Jesus. When wasn't there one? They'd never leave him alone. And that is where chapter 11 stops. Okay, so let's go ahead and read chapter 11. Okay. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you are going back there?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by this world's light. It is when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light." After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." Of course, they didn't understand. They thought he meant sleeping, not dead. His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, called Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." Because I thought Jesus was going to, get stoned. Because they was going to stone him last time he was there. Those the teachers of the law and stuff are always wanting to kill him. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was come into the world." And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. And the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." Jesus cried for Lazarus. But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, and for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped in strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him out." Therefore many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. And you think they're going to be like, "He just raised a man from the dead. Oh my, this is the Son of God, for real. Maybe we ought to start worshiping him too." No, they couldn't wait to put him to death still. "What are we accomplishing?" they asked. "Here is this man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up. He had his own motive. You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish. He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation. He's looking out for himself. And not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life, which, you know, they did even before that, but they were looking even more so now. Therefore, Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the Jews. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the desert, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, many went up from the country to Jerusalem for their ceremonial cleansing before the Passover. They kept looking for Jesus, and as they stood in the temple area, they asked one another, "What do you think? Isn't he coming to the feast at all?" But the chief priests and Pharisees had given orders that if anyone found out where Jesus was, he should report it so that they might arrest him. And that's where it stops. But later, you know, Judas Iscariot gets with them and, you know, like, what would you give me if I gave him up to you? And they agree on like 30 pieces of silver. And Judas Iscariot betrays Jesus, gives him up, which Jesus knew that was going to happen. That's why he told them that at the Last Supper. He knew it was Judas and what Judas was going to do. That's why Jesus tells him, do what you're going to do and do it quickly. So that is where chapter 11 stops with John. Now I'll read the devotion. This one is by Heidi Gall. She has wrote several of these. You have cancer. My fingers tightened on the receiver as the receptionist spoke. Wow, that's telling her on the phone. Didn't think they did that anymore. Details spilled out like water from a droplet glass. A type, stage, and post-surgery possibilities. Depending on the tumor size, I could lose a breast and require reconstructive surgery. I concentrated on keeping my voice even and held back tears, at least until I'd hung up. How can somebody do that job and hold back their tears? Oh my. That'd be a hard thing to do. The receptionist had to do that. Why wouldn't the doctor have to tell the patient? That's awful. Lay that on the receptionist's shoulders. Sorry, anyway. I concentrated on keeping my voice even and held back tears, at least until I hung up. The only words that came to mind were, "Why me, Jesus? Why now?" The weeks following that diagnosis were lost in a fog. Time alternately flew and dragged. As I waited to endure my procedure, my operation was a success, but ensuing radiation treatments left me confused, as if watching someone else's life through a pair of binoculars. I clung to Jesus, his abiding love, my private sanctuary. My faith strengthened even as my body weakened. Over several months, my self-confidence grew and my health returned. All 5 senses came alive, awakening a hunger for new experiences. Bit by bit, clarity of thought reappeared, and with it a new wisdom of gratefulness. Little things no longer bothered me. I became more aware of the blessings surrounded me. I learned that, like Lazarus, I wasn't alone. Friends, family, and Jesus had cried and prayed for me, and during that battle, I realized the true value of life I'd taken for granted. I didn't have to die to rise again. Our Lord restored me, body and soul. At last, I have the answer to the question, why? All right, guys, and now let's see what the homework is if you guys want to do it. Every morning before rising, so every morning before you get out of bed, name one troubling problem and give it to Jesus before you step foot out of that bed. Consider it dead to you and don't revive it. Replace it with a named blessing. So before you get your feet out of that bed every morning, think about something that's going bad in your life and tell it to God and know God's going to take care of it, and replace it with a blessing that's happened in your life and think about that instead and know God's got that problem under control. Trust God to take care of that problem. Give it up to God. So there's that if you guys want to do it. And let's go over the 3 verses we're supposed to be remembering before we end this Bible study. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And Proverbs 17:17. A friend loves at all times. And lastly, but not least, Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. You can do all things through Jesus, for he gives you strength. I hope you guys have a great rest of your night and a great night's sleep, and God bless you all.